Good morning all and welcome to the webinar. Some quick introductions from our side. I'm Michael Webb. I'm a unit manager at G3G. I look after value-added services for G3G. And joining me today is Frederick Reed from EPI-USE Labs.
Good morning, everyone. All right. So we at EPI-USE Labs, just a short introduction who hasn't worked with us before. EPI-USE Labs now here on the top hand side of the slide. We are part of Group Elephant, which you also see on the bottom half. EPI-USE Labs core focus is about really building great software. So we have a lot of SAP related experience. We have a lot of products, some of which are already in use on SAP systems for over 25 years, certified by SAP. I think in short, the main goal of EPI-USE Labs is really concentrated around building software. You can see also on the slide that we have a 97% client renewal rate, which we are really proud of. And since we are operating in over 50 countries on the globe, we also have a support that works around the clock essentially. But yeah, also just to point out, it's not about selling services, it's about delivering products. So you can also see that 23% of the revenue is actually be invested in our research and development activities again. All right, then to you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Frederick. I'm from G3G. We are the ERP specialists within the Elephant Group. Both myself and Frederick are part of the Group Elephant. So 20 trading brands, 3,700 employees across all 20 brands, and we're present in 42 countries. Been celebrating 40 years. On the G3G side, we are 25 years old and growing and going on. We are a cloud-first mindset. We have 3 qualified partner packages, and we have been a value-added seller since 2012. And we are a SAP certified center of expertise. We work quite closely with EPI-USE Labs. We use their tool sets in our migrations to S4. So we have a very strong relationship between EPI-USE Labs and G3G. So on to today's webinar. Some quick stats around S4 and the S4 journey at the moment. During a UKISAG Connect conference, UKISAG put some stats out there and revealed that in 9 in 10 current organizations in the S4 journey, 27% are already using S4 HANA, while 64% are still in the planning or adoption phase. Other market research that we found shows similar rates of brownfield and greenfield conversions approach with a hybrid close behind it. From this, we can extrapolate about 50% of all conversions may require manual data extraction and load, and will certainly leave some sort of legacy data or legacy systems behind, and data that organizations will need to keep hold of. That data won't make into S4 HANA or will need to be required to stay along for governance purposes, compliances, or any other business critical information. Sorry, I'll go back to that slide. From Gartner in 2024 of the second quarter, they showed a 50% increase of customers moving to public cloud S4 HANA. Now, this will definitely leave data behind that organizations have to consider of, where S4 HANA public cloud only allows open balances. Legacy data would need to be dealt with in some sort of way. From our migration perspective and what we've dealt with, these are the main pain points we've come across in our journey to S4 HANA, mainly around regulation, compliance, or risk. Legacy data often got GDPR or SOX or industry-specific rules, so organizations need to keep hold of them. Organizations have a complex of managing disparate data sources, be it SAP and non-SAP systems, all dotted around the organizations. And the biggest one is moving. Carrying over excess legacy data can extend the project timelines and increase migration complexity and inflate the costs of projects. And these have been the main pain points that we've come across. Today, we're going to deal with a tool from EPI-USE Labs that will help reduce that risk and bring down the compliance and complexity of your transition to S/4HANA. So we're going to start off with, see if everybody's awake, and start off with a poll question that will be popping up onto your screen now. Just how you describe your organization's approach to your SAP legacy management, if you can answer that. And we will then move on to the next part. This is where I'm going to hand over to Frederick and his expertise, and he's going to run through Archive Central, which will highlight how we can mitigate those pain points that we described earlier. Over to you, Frederick.
All right. Let me just share my screen.
Share your screen.
All right.
Yeah.
So the name of the product in question here is called Archive Central, and Archive Central, let's quickly kick off with, before we dive into detail with Archive Central in general, we have here one slide just as indicated earlier. For most of our products, in the core is really the data and how the data models were defined in the sub-world previously, and how we basically replicated how the SAP has defined their data models, how customers could extend the SAP standard or build their own custom data models. And now in the outer circle, we have a lot of different use cases where we build specific products and solutions for, where we can assist customers on their systems, and all relate back to the same way of how we deal with SAP's data model. And today we will now focus on the left-hand side on the archiving part, but it is neatly integrated with different aspects and use cases as well, as we will see in the demo later on. But just to kick off with a small demonstration. So on the visualization here, what you can see for the subsystem, the different colors respond to the different layers of an SAP system, while the red might be your client-dependent customizing, the lighter blue blocks represent master data, but the dark blue ones would then be all the transactional data that is built on top. And we have extractors that could, for example, if you specify one specific transactional object, for example, our engines or our products know what the document flow behind it consists of, so that we can always take the data in a consistent state. And also, if we have linked master data, we can have the consistent export of everything that you need if we export the data, no matter what the target system is. And so one sample selection screen, which would what it could look like, in this case, a material master. So on the top right-hand side, you can see different selection options that we can select on the bottom right-hand side, just specific data groups. So we do not always have to copy everything. We can limit down the relevant data to whatever is needed, and basically make the extract as as slim as needed, but without taking everything that you don't really need to keep on having in your target environment. But on the left-hand side of the selection screen, you can also see the integration tree. So we do not only copy the data in this example from the material master, but we also know how it links to, for example, batch-related data, the cost elements. So even if we start maybe with one material or a selection of materials, with a simple checkbox, we can integrate all other related data models into one export. And in our scenario today, this would be used to send the data across to Archive Central. And there are essentially two different ways of how we can get data across. The easiest, simplest way is simply by using a secure HTTPS connection, directly sending data from the SAP system to the Archive Central instance. But we can also use a file-based approach to export via file and import it on Archive Central. And this will also include all the attachments. We have extractors that can pull all the attachments that you might have, for example, for an invoice. If you have it scanned in as a PDF or as an image file, our extractors would find out that you have so and would automatically be able to pull them across and send it to Archive Central. But also what is highlighted for the flat file upload on the slide is also, if you have non-SAP systems on the side that might be in scope of your journey to S/4HANA, so if you have a Microsoft Dynamics system on the side, a Salesforce system, maybe something custom built that you will now also integrate in your new S/4HANA target environment, you can also use the same Archive Central instance to store this data. So Archive Central is as such is not SAP only. It is really an archive for everything that you might have in your system landscape as of today. And we again have a next poll question on that one, targeting about what are the biggest challenges you currently face with SAP data retention. All right. So then I think it's time enough. Let's just continue on this one, and we will just touch base on the poll later on. Next up is directly the live demonstration. And if I just jump to...
We've had a question come in,
yes,
Frederick, around Z tables. Do we bring in any Z tables?
Yes, so let me just maybe... Okay, let's just answer this one on the side. So basically, there are multiple ways of how we can deal with. So if it's simply a custom field that is sitting on top of a substandard table, then our extractors would bring it across automatically. If it is a custom table, as in your question, the question now is that custom table linked to an SAP standard model? Because if that is the answer to that question is true, then it would be most, like it would make the most sense if we link it to our substandard data model that it relates to. So if you have a custom table for a vendor record or for an invoice, it makes the most sense to link it to this one, because if you have a scenario, like a lot of customers have really outdated company codes that they do not want to bring to the S/4HANA system. So the custom tables might have records that relate to the company codes that you are not bringing to the target environment anyway. So if we simply link it to our substandard database models without any effort, it would slice your custom table as well. But so we also have experience with customers who are using SAP for so long, they built their complete own data models, custom data models, because when they implemented SAP didn't have a standard for whatever functional area they were working on. So you can also, if you have complete custom database models and custom reports and so on, we can also use our extractors to deal with them in the same way as we deal with substandard. All right. So quickly introducing the basic principles of the Archive Central system. So Archive Central, I'm now using Firefox to get access to the system itself. So Archive Central is a system that is hosted in the cloud. I can use any browser that I might need to access the system itself. And but it integrates similar to any other system that you might have in your landscape. So if you have a single sign-on solution, you can link the single sign-on solution here as well. If you have a identity management system, the same applies to that one. And we typically suggest to customers to set up the Archive Central instance so that it's only accessible from within the customer's own network or VPN, just to add this additional security layer on top. And on Archive Central, we now have on the top hand side, we have the concept of workspaces. So that is also something that can be flexible in the usage itself. But on our demo instance here, we use the workspaces to separate data by different functional areas, such as a finance area, an HCM area. So it is just something that makes it easier to use our authorization model that we have built on top of it, and to make smaller dashboards with just the data that a user might need. So in another example, we also have enterprises who uses Archive Central. So they might have data that is coming from different systems, maybe different countries or continents. So a workspace could also be used to separate data by the originating system or the originating country where the data belongs to. And if I'm a finance user, I might, for example, only see and have access to the finance workspace. And in the finance workspace itself, on the right-hand side, we now have the concept of a collection, and a collection directly represents one specific business object, one specific data model for a source system. So on this side, we can also combine data that is coming from the SAP world, but also if you have data that is coming from a non-SAP system, it will also be listed here if it is relevant for the finance workspace here. So we have a collection for a vendor, master record, cost center, but also transactional, like an accounting document. And on the bottom side, we also have saved views. A saved view now is something like a simple report that is built on top of the collections that we have available. And just to reiterate, in a collection, we are not only combining everything that sits on database level, like all the database tables, including your custom tables. You might have attached documents that would all automatically directly sit in the collection where it is relevant to. And if I now take a look on the extraction side. So up until now, it looks very generic, slightly different to how you might be used to on the sub side, although we try to make it as similar as possible. So some of the saved views like FBL1N, FBL3N directly represent the transaction code that your users might be used to. So at first, it might look like a lot of manual efforts, but if we now take a look at the extraction side, so just to give you a brief overview. So the extraction is typically being done by our consultants or the consultants that are doing the delivery. And if I simply create a new export from my source SAP system on that side, the first step here is basically defining what my starting business object is. And we have a complete section on custom content. So if you have very complex custom data models, we could have a business object that represents exactly that on the bottom hand side here. But here on the top hand side, you can see that we effectively try to replicate how SAP also ordered the data models in the specific sections, such as logistics. Material masters was one of the examples we've seen earlier, but also, for example, at accounting, we can also see stuff like the vendor, the GL account, and also transactional data that is needed on top of that. And just to give you a simple example, we've seen the selection screen on the one slide earlier, but just to give a quick example, if my use case is just archiving one vendor for purpose of this demo, on the left-hand side, I can now say, all right, I might be interested to also copy all the GL accounts that are related to this very vendor. On the selection screen, I can now see what it found in based on my selection criteria on the system, but I can also expand it and see what related GL accounts in this example was found. And if I'm unsure of the selection, I can also just double click and use SAP standard just to verify and take a look if that's really the data that I'm interested in. And also one point to mention here, the step itself is called redaction options, but it's much more than that. It's more like a transformation step that you have in between as an optional step. For example, in a use case where you migrate to S/4HANA, there might be transformations going in parallel to either renumber company codes, merge company codes, maybe on your cost centers, or whatever your example might be. Oftentimes there is some kind of transformation, and we can directly link the transformation logic within the exporting side. So if you have multiple test cycles, it is neatly integrated, and it simply speeds up the process to make a test run, see how the transformation ended up with, and it just simply standardizes and makes the final go live later on much more safer also. But
are we able to slice the data anyway by company code or period or anything like that?
Yes. So let's just see in the example here. So we have multiple options to slice on. Company code is one of the most common used example. I think for data retention, it is also worth mentioning that we can slice by time. So, and also we can say, all right, for the HCM data, I might need the data for the last 10 years. But for the financial data, I might need the data for the last 30 years. So you can also specify these slicing criteria per business object because usually in a data retention use case, you have different data retention rules and periods, and also that might differ per country where the data is coming from. So we can do that, and as mentioned earlier, we can do the same for custom tables, custom content, but all the slicing is pre-built within the data models that we have already.
Perfect, thanks.
All right, and on here, again, we could execute this by a file export, but that would require some manual efforts. We can directly send the data via HTTPS to my target environment, and then I could, if I just jump back, so from the consultant that is doing the work, I could jump into the administration area and already monitor the sync that is happening in the back end, and just to verify in such a project if I got everything that was related. So I have different metrics. Everything gets tracked and logged so that you can verify that whatever specified ended up in the system. We could, for example, take a look on table level and take a look at, for example, here in the center of the column of the technical names, the last bit is the table name in the SAP world. So LFB5, for example, for this one, we found 12 related records based on the selection and so on. But also, and these are the logs on our target system, on Archive Central. You have the same on the export side. We can also see that it not only created a collection for my vendor record, it also created one for the GL accounts that I have selected in the selection options, and also like the address related data is implicitly also like a separate collection because it's so universally used. And now I could simply go to my vendor example, and it now imported the vendor 1000, and I could just take a look and compare it with how SAP has structured the data. And for example, we can see that on Archive Central, we have the data grouped in different tabs. So it looks at first different, but if you take a closer look, you see that we try to define the Archive Central instance as close as possible to your source system. So we have one tab for the address data, one for the control, for example, and that directly simulates how we in the SAP world have address and control data separated and so on. So we try to make it as close as it would have looked like on your source system, although on Archive Central, it is, of course, a more generic view because we might also have data from non-SAP systems here. And yeah, so
all the data is being pulled directly from SAP, the naming conventions, the table names.
Yes,
we do have the ability to edit what we see there for users and create workspaces, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And also just going back to the custom content. So if you have a custom field on one of these screens, it is very easy to also display it here. But basically during the implementation, our consultants would pre-deliver everything as requested, as it looked like on the source system. And then the customer can just ask for any change if anything should be further enhanced to how it looked on the source system. All right, so that's the base principle. And in the substandard world, I think the last time I checked, we have over 1,500 business objects roundabout. So we are pretty confident in saying that in the SAP standard world, we have everything that exists, and it is our extractor is really meant to be expanded because we know how highly customized every separate SAP system is. So that is really built in and can be expanded rather quickly. If I now take an example, look at accounting documents. So one point worth mentioning here, every time data is displayed in such a tabular view, we have multiple options to choose from. So on the left-hand side, I have filter criteria, and we can see that currently this set is already filtering my accounting documents based on fiscal year 2012. But if I click on Add Filter, I have access to all the database tables and fields, including your custom tables or custom fields that I could now build a filtering on. And in this example, I already, it suggested me that I could also filter on company code. So I could say, so what we see here is on this demo instance, we just have data for the company codes that are listed here. So I could just select the ones that I'm interested in, maybe 1,000, 2,500, just apply the filter. And also if there is a request from an auditor, for example, and the data needs to be displayed in a specific order, on the top right-hand side, I can also go to the table settings and now change the way, first of all, which columns need to be displayed, how should they be sorted, ordered, is the data needs to be grouped in a specific way. And that especially makes sense because now we could, if my user has authorization to do so, get the data out of the system again if I need to provide it to the auditor, for example. But also if the auditor requires direct system access, which in some countries they have a legal right to get access, you can get them a temporary user on the system, limit their authorization to only be able to access whatever they should have access to. And everything that is being done on the system will be tracked. So you can see which user accessed which parts of the system. And also if someone tried to download or downloaded some parts of the data. So even though the system is read-only, you see what is happening on the system. Again, on this filtering now. So if my filter simply on fiscal year, on company codes and whatnot, if this is like a query that might happen on a regular basis, on the top right-hand side, I can simply create a new saved view based on that. So if I just click on that, I can give it a name, such as, let's say fiscal year 2012, company codes 1000 and 2500. Give it some meaningful name. I mean, that's maybe not the best example, but on the right-hand side, I could now also change and say, is this now only relevant for me? Is it maybe relevant for all my FI colleagues or all the colleagues on the system? And could simply create this one. And so now either I have these saved views on as an option on the heading here, or I could again link it to the dashboard in the workspace to get an access for everyone. But I could also add it to my favorites. So now it just created this link on the bottom side of the screen. So no matter where I am in the system, I directly have access and can get to the report that I need to use on a regular basis rather fast. And now if I just drill into one of these documents, similar as the earlier example with the master data, we have the document header here. We have the different items, the positions on a next tab. And if I have links to existing GL accounts, cost centers, and so on, we can link these fields so that you can click on the number and it jumps to the related entry for the GL account. So you can navigate quite easy between the sets of data that you have available on the archive. And maybe just as another example, we have a section, a workspace for all our HCM data. And before I drill into one of the collections, some of the save views could, for example, also be displayed in such a visualization. In this case, it is filtering mainly on the action type, which could represent an employee that was hired and joined the company in a specific year, or left the company in a specific year. That would be a different action type. And we have a selection on the range of years further down here. And I could directly drill into the section of the graph here if I'm interested in this part. And now I get an overview of all the employees that were 01 is that employee was hired. So all the new employees that joined the company in 1999. And what we can also see on the HCM area, that here we have an example of combining, so the top two collections are data that is coming from an SAP system, but we also have data, for example, that is coming from SuccessFactors system. I mean, although it also has SAP in the name, this data structure and the system infrastructure is something completely different. But we also have an example for something completely non-SAP, so an ultimate HR system. It's just a competing product, which is used by some companies, I believe, especially in the US. So also if I just drill down into this one, the system behaves the same no matter where the data is coming from. We have the data separated in different tabs. And especially in such a use case, if it has a relationship to other collections, we can either create a unified user interface or link them so that you can jump between the collections rather quickly.
Spoke earlier about unstructured data or attachments. How does Archive Central handle those attachments or unstructured data?
All right, so one example can also be shown in the employee data. So if I just drill to the pay information in this example, just pick one of the payroll periods. What we can see here on the top hand side, the payslip is also attached to this period in form of a PDF file. So if I just click on that, the attachment or the PDF file in this example is simply attached to this record, can be displayed in line in the browser. And again, if I have authorization to download this PDF, this attachment, I can do so on the top right-hand side with the download button, but maybe also worth highlighting here all the tables that we see on the bottom here, like the results table, RT, CRT, and so on. Those are actually tables that on the SAP side would sit inside one of the cluster tables. So on the SAP system, it would be very difficult to take a look at this data and especially extracting data from clustered tables. But yeah, as you see here, I can also just click on the table headings like the RT header, and it will open up this table in a transparent form, similar to how an SE16 transaction in the SAP world would look like. But this very table, you wouldn't be able to use SE16 on the SAP side because this table is actually in a clustered format on the SAP side. So our extractors are also able to read everything that is stored within cluster tables, and it is simply automatically transforming the data in a transparent format. And since I'm now again viewing the data in a tabular form, similar to how we looked at accounting documents before, I can again create filters on specific, let's say, wage type. I can either search for fields by the technical name or the description. And I could now say, all right, I'm only interested in wage types 101 and maybe 102, because those are the first two rows here. And then maybe just remove the previous filter. And I could build a report now on tables that in the SAP world were sitting behind clusters. So you wouldn't be able to do something like this without an ABAP developer. But yeah, just worth to highlight, Archive Central as such isn't really a reporting solution, but since we extract the data with our extractors in such an easy and transparent form, if you have such simple queries, you can use it without any development knowledge and just, again, create a save view for this one, for example, and prepare everything that might be relevant for a future audit, internal or external. And yeah, this is the basic idea behind Archive Central in general. So if I just jump back to the slides. So starting off with business drivers. So the main focus area where we started off with, the main use case where we assisted customers and clients with Archive Central was in general sunsetting legacy systems. So for example, not just when they moved to an S/4HANA system, but we also have a lot of customers that have old legacy SAP systems that are set to read-only mode and are sitting in their system landscape for over 20 years. And over time, it gets really expensive to keep them running. So you might not only have licenses cost, the hardware needs to be replaced if it's hosted on own server infrastructure, but all related maintenance, patches, security updates, and so on, just to protect the old data that gets very expensive over time. And so that was the first use case where we started off with assisting in customer projects. A lot of times we also see business divestitures where the buying side might forget that they also need to have read-only access to all the historical data of whatever the company code or plant that they bought. So that is also a common use case where we assist with Archive Central, but in general, any kind of system or business transformation that you might have where you still need to keep the data as it was for data retention reasons. No matter if you're going to an S/4HANA system, maybe if you're completely moving away from the SAP world, this might also be applicable. Or if you're coming from a non-SAP system and going to S4, no matter the combination, Archive Central is very flexible in how it is can be leveraged in the customer's landscape. And the slide here simply highlights how the licensing model works. So obviously during the implementation, there might be some one-time cost depending on what type of system it is, how difficult is it to bring the data into our world. But again, if it is a SAP system, we typically just use our extractors because they automate as much as possible and bring the manual efforts down as much as possible. But this one now is purely on the subscription for the Archive Central instance itself, and we effectively use 4 different pillars to build our pricing on. So we have on the left-hand side a base subscription, but if any of these specific criteria exceed what is covered in the base subscription, you can add additional add-ons on the right-hand side, just wherever it exceeded the base component. So in short, it really aims for use cases where you might archive multiple systems in one of the same archive instances, because oftentimes customers only think about archiving if they have a big ERP system that needs to be archived, but they forget all the smaller systems that might also need to be archived on the same instance. In such a use case, even though you are only maybe migrating the smaller systems in 1 or 2 years' time, Archive Central can cater and store them as well whenever they need archiving. So Archive Central is really something not just for the current archiving needs, but it could serve for all the future ones as well. And just to read out the base subscription components here, one is really how many source systems are on the Archive Central instance. In the base subscription, it is just targeted for 1 source system. The second one is how many billion rows we have in the target Archive Central instance. And so keeping in mind, our approach is oftentimes not a lift and shift, but we try to advise and guide the customers to shrink the size of the data down to whatever is really relevant and throw out everything to save space and database rows in this context, just to make it as cost efficient as possible, because you might need an archiving solution for this data for the next 30 years or so. So the more we can slice the data down to what is really relevant, the cheaper it gets over time. And the third one is the file size for all the unstructured data. So unstructured data is everything that is not stored in the database. It could be my PDF file that is linked to my invoice. It might be an image file, a text file, whatever you have which is not stored in the database directly, that would land up in the unstructured data. And also we have a limit on the amount of users, but typically only very few key users need really access to that legacy system. So oftentimes less than 10 users, or maybe 10 users might be created on an Archive Central instance. But yeah, it's still one of the factors on this one. And then we have our third poll, and then I would also hand over back to you, Michael.
Sure. So while we get the poll up and running, if you don't mind answering the last question, if you can go to the last slide, we've got questions and answers, and we actually got 2 questions that came through for you, Frederick. The first one is, are the connections into the SAP for extraction connecting to the application layer or the database layer?
All right, so our products, where I start with it. So basically, it all works on the ABAP stack. Our products are essentially a sub-certified add-on, and it is completely running on the application layer, so not directly using database connections. You also don't need middleware of some kinds. It is really just a sub add-on. You get a transport from ours that gets imported into the system, and then if we send data directly to the Archive Central instance using HTTPS, for example, we would just need to set up an RFC connection on that system that is like from SAP to an HTTP endpoint, or using a file export approach. But basically, it all runs on the application layer, so it also leverages the authorization model that you have on your source system and so on.
The second question is, how is authorizations and access to Archive Central managed? Can it be synchronized with SAP IAM?
All right. In general, we can link it, but Archive Central has its own authorization model built on top. And that mainly is the reason because we can combine data from different systems, from different source systems on one and the same archive instance. So yes, it can be linked, but it is a different layer. Usually it's just a separate authorization model that is directly being built on the Archive Central side. And keep in mind, the users that really need access to the archive data is just such a selected few amounts. You oftentimes don't really need that many different authorization roles. There might be one authorization role per functional area, and since only very key users of that functional area get access to the system anyways, oftentimes we don't really need to restrict it even further. So just because of this simplicity on that level, we oftentimes don't really need to link it, but it is possible.
Just another question coming through. If we have already done a portion of archiving, how do we move the data to your solution from archive files?
All right. I think multiple answers here. So if the data is still accessible from within the SAP system, our extractors know how to pick it up. But if it's using some kind of external archive system that is not directly linked to the SAP system, let's pick an example. So you have an attachment, but that attachment, while it corresponds to a specific transactional data record on your subside, you cannot really view the attachment from the SAP system. In that case, our extractors couldn't directly find it. So it would require a manual step to get these files, but everything that can be viewed from within the SAP systems, our extractors know how to pull out and archive automatically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question that came through, how long is a typical implementation?
All right. So I think the fastest implementations we have done was at 6 weeks, typically in use cases of where like business divestitures, where the buying side is losing system access. So in such scenarios, we need to act fast. So it can be really fast because much of the extraction is really automated using our extractors. But I would say if you don't really have such a hard deadline where you lose system access, most projects run around 6 months rather. But yeah, somewhere between 6 weeks, 6 months. I think that is a proper estimation.
Final question for today is, can queries be run against the low-level table in Archive Central?
All right. So also again, multiple answers on how we can achieve this. So we on Archive Central itself, we can view the data from within collections. We can view the data from, we can directly address and take a look at the tables on table level, and we can build simple queries such as the SAP views, as we've seen before, with just a few clicks on Archive Central directly. But we, for example, also have a RESTful API. So if you have a BI solution or some external system where you want to build queries, run queries based on data that is already sitting in the archive, you can also connect and read data through the API to build more complex queries or complex reports. So there are multiple ways of how to do it. It really depends on the use case and how frequent the data needs to be queried. And one point just highlighting here, I mean, the data, once the data is archived, it will not change. And so if it will not change, the reports, like the report requirement is very little. You don't need as many reports on legacy data anyways, but there are ways of how to integrate it. It really depends on the use case, and we can guide and assist on this one.
Great. And then I think we just had one quick one that came in now. What is the business value over the basic data dump of required SAP data to flat file?
All right. I mean, the point just to make is while your current users, business users, might know how in the SAP world the data structures are and which tables are the one that have the data that you're looking for, we have customers where the system is already in read-only for over 20 years, and they currently have no user that knows how, like, what data is sitting on there. They just know they can't delete the system. So my point being, at one point, you will lose maybe the know-how on how the data was being stored in the past. And if you simply have the data dumped in flat files, you don't have all the metadata on knowing how the data link to maybe other tables. And maybe if you see something like in one of the earlier examples, we had an action type of 0, 1. So I was directly filtering on the numeric value, but for example, our extractor is also pulling all the text tables. So it would also pull you the description of what 0, 1 really stands for. And you can decide on the Archive Central instance, do you want to use the numeric value? Do you want to use the text value? But all that knowledge will get lost if you simply try to use CSV files and CSV dumps to retain data. Yes, you could do it. Is it a pretty solution? Probably not. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Frederick, for your time. If there's no more questions, we'd like to thank everybody for attending.